Hey, it's me, MLB. Here is part 2 of Defier. Enjoy. After sneaking out of the closet, Dabi took you out through a side door of the place so you could avoid dying that day. He figured if Shigaraki had a chance to calm down a bit, then you'd both be safe, so you and he laid low for the rest of that day, then snuck back in that night after stealing some food for dinner. The next day, you awoke to Dabi shaking the back of your shirt. You had passed out face down on your bed the night before, and the only thing that he could grab, the only appropriate thing he could grab, was your back. You mumbled, jumping, awake at the feeling of someone touching you. Hey, what's better than a pissed-off cross cake? He asked. Oh, what? You mumbled back in a sleepy voice. Like, you liked that Dabi had woken you up, but what the hell was he on about? A bit of context, if you wouldn't mind, please, Dabi. Pissed-off cross cake, he said again, still not making any sense. Who is a pissed-off cross cake? You mumbled, rolling over onto your back and reaching one hand up above your head to scratch through your hair. If you don't pay attention, I'm going to pin you to the bed, Dabi threatened. Am I in for the duct tape treatment? You leered cheekily, one eye still shut and the other barely open. Careful what you wish for, Dabi smirked, his eyes quickly detailing you lying there almost under him as he leaned over the bed. His icy hot stare raked down your body, causing a hot rush of blood to areas that you didn't want it to go to, and you quickly cleared your throat and sat up, sitting in a position that was best for concealing things. So, what are you on about so early in the morning? You asked through a yawn, trying to change subjects back to what he had first woken you up for. I know it's unthinkable that I'd be up at 2 p.m, but the time is, in fact, 2 p.m, Dabi replied dryly. So I'm going to say it slowly so that you can keep up with me, yeah? Wake your final brain cell up. Yeah, it's ready, you replied with a chuckle. Okay, what's better than a pissed-off cross cake? He asked you. Enlighten me, you replied, still sitting on the bed in a strategic position. A pissed-off cross cake the next day, he replied with a smirk. I'd like to tell you that my brain cell was able to keep up with what you just said, but that would be a lie. Can you speak in dead brain cellese, please? You asked. Okay, you know how Miss Universe Chapstick King got some lessons from Toga about skincare or whatever? He asked you. Yeah, you replied dubiously. Well, what if his chapstick got replaced by a lipstick that glowed in the dark and couldn't be wiped off easily? Dabi asked, barely holding back his mischievous grin. You didn't, you said in disbelief, that quickly turned into an approving chuckle. Yeah, I did, he replied, finally cracking and allowing the corners of his lips to tug into a devious smirk. When? You asked, finally venturing to adjust how you were sitting and get out of bed. Before, while you were getting a beauty sleep, pumpkin, he said with mild sass, having a light dig at how long you had slept for. Again, it was another throwaway comment, but why did you like that he had called you pumpkin? So what's the plan, honey? You asked back, getting out of bed and walking to the ensuite to wash your face. There was no reply for a second and you stopped and looked back at him. Honey? He asked. Yeah, well, you called me pumpkin, didn't you? He asked with much indifference as you could muster. If you're going to give me cute pet names, be warned that I'm going to start acting how a honey would, he replied with a smirk. And how does a honey act? You almost asked, but refrained, jumping back onto the topic that originally started before you almost derailed. What's plans? Plans are to kill the lights at tonight's meeting, to let our coat rack for hands have his shining moment, Dabi smirked. Sounds like Death Part 2, you said, your voice echoing slightly as you had entered the small bathroom now and had your hands on the taps to get the water running. Dabi did say something while you were washing your face, but you couldn't hear him over the rush of the water, and once you'd finished and dried your face on the hand towel by the basin, you turned around and looked up at him as you straightened. Sorry, what'd you say? You asked, walking towards him. You expected him to step back from the ensuite doorway so that you could walk out, but he just placed one hand up on the frame above his head and held his ground as you approached. I said I want to explore the honey comment, he said, looking down at you a little. Dabi wasn't that much taller than you, but why did you suddenly feel so small in front of him? Yeah, well, you called me pumpkin. Let's explore that first. Have you got a thing for pumpkins? You teased lightly. Yeah, I do actually, especially the ones who sleep until 2 p.m, he said without breaking a sweat or eye contact, and your body suddenly tensed as adrenaline shot through your veins. That was a dead obvious comment right there. Well, you stalled, but saved by a knock on the door, you didn't get to say anything else and you both looked over at the door. Only orange-coloured things are allowed in, Dabi called out. We have a pumpkin and a honey in here. I don't understand, Toga's voice came floating in from the other side of the door. Yeah, red's close enough, you said to Dabi, and he shrugged and dropped his arm down from the doorframe and stepped back to let you out of the ensuite. What's up, Stabby? You asked as you walked to the door and opened it for her. Shigaraki told me to remind you both to come to the meeting later, she said, looking at you, and then Dabi, who was still standing further back in the room. Yep, got it. Wouldn't miss it for the world, he replied sarcastically. Yeah, it's going to be a real zinger this meeting. I'm already lit up about it, Dabi said loudly from behind you. You snorted, catching his joke, and ran with it. Yeah, it's going to be a highlight, he replied. Dabi snorted too then, and Toga just gave you both a confused look. You're both weird, she stated before turning and skipping off merrily down the corridor. That's odd, she didn't call us by our given names, you said as you closed the door and turned back to Dabi. He shrugged. I don't want her to call me honey anyway. Deciding that you were both hungry, you headed out to eat your last meal before your possible deaths. You'd managed to escape yesterday's prank backlash, but you weren't sure if Shigaraki would let this one slide. If you were going to die with Dabi today, then so be it. It would be an honour anyway. Meeting time finally came, and you and Dabi entered the bar area with the other members of the League of Villains, all of you choosing where to sit or stand while you waited for Shigaraki to appear. Are you sure he's going to have it on? You whispered to Dabi as you both stood up against the back wall near the light switch. Yeah, Toga gets on his case on the regular. He'll be glowing like a lightsaber on May the 4th, Dabi said nonchalantly. Nice Star Wars reference, you chuckled, smirking across at him. Thanks, Pumpkin. Dabi smirked back, and you cleared your throat and looked away slightly bashfully. Suddenly Shigaraki appeared, stepping out of Kurogiri's black swirling mass into the room, making as dramatic an entrance as possible, but you just found it comical and let a snort of amusement out. Dabi nudged you and you quickly recovered as Shigaraki gave you a deathly glance. Welcome, Shigaraki said with grand hand-sweeping gestures to everyone. Let the meeting begin. When's the show going to start? You whispered to Dabi. Soon, he replied, as he readied his hand at the switch. We are all here, stated Shigaraki, looking around at everybody, because we strive for a better world, one we can be truly free. Yeah, would be so much more convincing if his lips were glowing right now, you whispered to Dabi, who smirked and flicked the lights off. You got it, he whispered back. Said Shigaraki, then paused when he realised the lights had been turned off. Your eyes adjusted in the dark very quickly, and all you could see were a pair of glowing lips right where Shigaraki was standing. Who turned the lights off? The pair of glowing lips asked. You were laughing silently, and so was Dabi beside you, his hand gripped to your left arm as you both wheezed away in the back of the room. Shigaraki, your lips, Spinner said from somewhere near the front. I didn't know the chapstick glowed, that's so cool, Toga gushed. What? Shigaraki asked, touching his fingers to his lips, but unable to wipe any of it off. It makes lip reading much easier, Dabi called out, making you wheeze even harder. Why is it glowing, Toga? Shigaraki asked, his glowing, floating lips making you and Dabi lose it even more. You were bent over now and Dabi was smacking you on the back as he wheezed beside you. I didn't know it glowed, Toga replied defensively. I don't like it glowing. It won't come off, Shigaraki pouted, starting to scratch at the side of his neck with frustration and agitation. Suddenly he heard you and Dabi wheezing from the back of the room and smelled a rat. You did this, he suddenly shouted, his glowing lips floating menacingly closer to you and Dabi. Oh, run, you wheezed out, finally righting yourself and grabbing Dabi as you ran for the door. The door suddenly flying open and blinding light entering made Shigaraki shrink back and shield his eyes, but by that time you had gone, now letting out your full howling laughter as you bolted down the hallway. Don't think this is over, you both heard Shigaraki yell after you. It's our lucky day, day 2 and we haven't died, you called out to Dabi, who was a pace ahead of you now. You're my lucky charm, Pumpkin, Dabi called back, and you laughed as you kept pace behind him. You're such a jerk, honey, you shouted, tailing him out of the building. How these two have not died yet is beyond me. Stay tuned for next week for part 3 of Defier. I'll see you then.